Hello, everybody. Welcome to Serverless Office Hours. Hi, Ben. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Hey, thanks for having us.
And so we're actually on opposite sides of the world right now. So I'm in Los Angeles. Ben and Alex are in London. And I'm sure there's people from all over the world joining us. So thank you, everyone. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to get started. Very exciting. Okay. Cool. Can you guys see my slides?
Yes, and got mine.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome to Serverless Office Hours. I'm Talia. I'm a senior developer advocate for AWS Serverless, and I'm joined by my two friends, Ben and Alex. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, I'm Ben. I'm an AWS Serverless hero, meaning I speak at events like this, conferences and meetups, as well as writing a lot about serverless. I'm also the VP of engineering at a company called Theodo. We help people building digital products, and I really lead the teams helping clients adopt serverless. I've just got a message from Alex that he's frozen, and he looks quite frozen. So I'm just going to cover him for a second while he reconnects. Alex works alongside me at Theodo as a cloud architect in our serverless team, so helping clients to adopt serverless, whether that's greenfield new projects or migrating legacy over to serverless. He's also an AWS Community Builder, which is kind of a similar program to the Hero program, where he works in the community. He runs the Serverless London meetup with me, as well as the Serverless Transformation newsletter, and we both work together on content for that blog. And me and Alex today are going to talk about some of the open source tooling we've been building.
Awesome. Are there any Serverless London events coming up that we can talk about here?
Yes, we actually have Luca from AWS talking at the next Serverless London meetup. You might know him from the sort of micro front-end work he's been doing. And that event, Alex actually knows the date, but it's probably in about 2 weeks' time. You can find all the details on meetup.com if you search Serverless London, and they're all streamed out on YouTube as well.
Awesome. Okay, so we will keep an eye out for that. Okay, so last week in Serverless Office Hours, Eric and I talked about cores, and our DA team created this new tool. It's called the Cores Configurator. If you go to cores.serverlessland.com, you can see this new tool, and it basically helps you with cores errors, which is it's a pain point for a lot of developers. So if you haven't checked it out, go to cores.serverlessland.com and you can see all the things that we built. In AWS Serverless, let's talk about some of the things that are new in all of our different services. So in case you didn't hear, AWS Lambda has support for Python 3.9 now. For API Gateway now supports mutual TLS with certificates from third-party CAs and ACM private CA. For Cloud 9, we have new features to browse CloudWatch logs, S3, and to use EC2 instance profiles. Amplified Geo is now available for AWS Amplify. It lets you do really cool things with finding your location. AWS SAM, you can simplify CI/CD configuration for serverless applications and your favorite CI/CD system. Another one for Lambda, we have Amazon Code Guru Profiler that has a new automated onboarding process for AWS Lambda functions. And as usual, we have a ton of new blog posts out. So Eric wrote something on configuring cores for API Gateway. Oh, Slack, go away. And this is the tool that we were talking about before, and you can do that on cores.serverlessland.com. James wrote a couple of blog posts. He wrote about the Lambda, the new Python runtime for Lambda, and adding resiliency to CloudFormation. Julian has a couple of new blog posts out, and Julian wrote this series called Building Well-Architected Serverless Applications, and there's a whole series on what the best practices are for well-architected serverless apps. So if you haven't looked at these, I highly recommend you do. They're super useful. Our friend Ben over in London, Ben Smith, wrote an entire series on getting started with serverless. So if you don't have any serverless experience or you want to just get started from an intro, this is where you can do that. So he has a whole series on first deploying an application from your IDE and just getting like the benefits of serverless. And then you start building your business logic, and then you deploy your application. And so if you haven't seen this Getting Started series by Ben, this is a really good place to start. We talked about the Well Architected series, what Julian was working on. This is my favorite part of serverlessland.com. It's our patterns collection. And basically what our patterns do is it helps you build serverless applications from the services that you choose. So if you go to serverlessland.com/patterns, on the left, you'll see a set of filters, and you choose the filters that you want to build your application with, and then you'll find both AWS SAM and CDK templates. And all you have to do is deploy those templates, and you'll have the application with the services that you choose. So super helpful. If you haven't checked out our patterns, I think this is a really good place to start as well. So today we have our serverless surprise, and we're going to be talking about SLS dev tools and SLS test tools, which I'm going to let Ben and Alex talk about in a minute. Next week, we're going to be talking about AWS messaging and events, and Eric is going to be talking about processing DynamoDB change data. It'll be at the same time next week. And for all of your serverless needs, head over to serverlessland.com. Okay, so let's see. Is Alex back? Alex, are you with me?
Perfect timing.
Great. Okay,
I'm back. Sorry about my computer crashing right at the start time.
No, that's okay. You came back in perfect timing. So let's go ahead and Ben, are you gonna share your screen?
I'll share my screen first and talk through the background, and then Alex is going to walk through on the demo. So yeah, thanks so much for having us. Obviously, I introduced myself a minute ago. Alex, do you want a quick moment here to introduce yourself? I spoke for you, which probably wasn't great.
I'm sure you introed just as well as I would have. I'm sure Ben already said this, but I work at Theodo with Ben with clients to help them develop both, whether it's a startup launching a brand new product or a larger, more established company doing a digital transformation. I sort of work with them to go through the entire flow of developing and releasing and maintaining. And when I'm not working with clients, I'm an AWS Community Builder. So I write blog posts. I have a fortnightly newsletter that me and a few colleagues at Theodo write. And I'm on Twitter quite a lot, so you can always find my content there.
Nice. And a lot of the content Alex puts out in the iPad, it's on the serverless transformation medium. So if you want to read any of that, you can find it there. Today, I want to talk to you about two tools. So SLS dev tools, which we're going to talk about first, and then Alex is going to demo, and then SLS test tools. But if we just go to SLS dev tools for a moment, I wanted to try and give some of the background on how we got to building the tool and how I've expanded it from there. Now, it actually started with EventBridge. Now, when Amazon EventBridge came out, we were really excited. It enables us to have an event bus, which allows us to build really great event-driven serverless architectures. We're typically using it to connect microservices that we're building in a completely serverless way, but you can also use it to connect events from third-party SaaS or other AWS services, some of which are serverless and some of which are not. Now, we really view it as the biggest announcement since AWS Lambda. It fundamentally changed how we build our serverless architectures with our clients, and it's become a really key component for us building sort of state-of-the-art event-driven architectures. We actually built up a methodology about this, EventBridge storming. If you want to read about that, you can find it on the serverless transformation blog. But the output of that typically is the applications we build with our clients typically look something like this, a collection of microservices split up by different sort of domain contexts in that client's business domain. But those microservices communicate with each other completely asynchronously over Amazon EventBridge. It used to be that we'd have sort of HTTP synchronous request response between them. Now we just publish events onto the event bus, and EventBridge handles the routing between those, which is really great. And as I mentioned before, third-party SaaS vendors can also have events. So Zendesk, for instance, can have events going directly to Amazon EventBridge because it's an EventBridge partner, and that can trigger then subsequent events inside of our architecture. And one other thing to mention on that, the EventBridge schema registry is something we're using really heavily, which allows us to either automatically detect or define the schema of the events that travel over that event bus. The schema being the name and the properties and the types of those properties for each event. And they can export directly to type definitions in languages like TypeScript, which creates a really powerful development workflow for multiple teams working together and sharing their types. But one question we started having was, how do we trigger an event? Now, we knew that we could use the SDK, but our clients were often struggling when they're initially adopting EventBridge to know exactly how to trigger the events. And it's a bit less intuitive than if you had an HTTP sort of endpoint that you could hit with something like Postman. So we tried to then solve this problem by creating an open source tool that made it easier to trigger EventBridge events. And also subsequently, we made it easier to trigger Lambda functions and look at logs and sort of become a sort of development tool for serverless architectures, which is SLS DevTools. Now, enough of me talking and having slides. Alex, do you want to take over and walk us through a live demo of SLS DevTools?
Yeah, of course.
And of course,
cool. So I hope everyone.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, and we can answer those as Alex goes through.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, go ahead and ask in the chat, and we'll get them to Ben and Alex.
Cool. All right. So this that you're seeing on the screen here is SLS DevTools when you first open up, what it looks like. If anyone wants to sort of follow along what we're doing, we actually have a sort of demo repo on my GitHub that you can have a look at. We can pop that in the comments or the chat later. But basically, SLS DevTools, when you open it, you don't see too much. And I'll just show you how easy it is to open. So once you install SLS DevTools on your project, it's just a simple yarn SLS-dev-tools, and you pass in your profile.
Alex, can you make your terminal just a little bit bigger?
Yeah, of course. Let's see, is that easier to read?
Yes, thank you.
Well, I might just close and redo it because I think some of that ASCII art changes. Well, we saw it earlier, it says DevTools normally when the font's a bit lower. But basically, when you first open it up, you'll see your Lambdas that you've got deployed. If I sort of tap to the right, you'll actually be able to see all the resources you have. So it's a very easy way without having to open up the console to see all the resources you have deployed for a certain stack. And it detected the stack automatically for us when I launched it using the profile I passed in and the cloud formation in the folder that I had open. So before I get too far into what you can do with SLS DevTools, I'm just going to quickly show you the repo that we're running it in. So this it just is a very simple service that just has two Lambdas in it. One called place order, that all this does is when it's triggered, emits an event to an EventBridge, and then another one called create invoice. And all this does is when it receives an event off the EventBridge, it stores a PDF in S3. So it's fairly simple. It's just two Lambdas and an EventBridge. And now we can kind of see what we can do with SLS DevTools to sort of play around with those without having to go to the console. So first up, if I click enter on any of these Lambdas, so let's start with the place order. If I click enter, we can see the function metrics, the Lambda logs, and the sort of most recent durations of functions. So we can see here, sort of in prep for this this demo, I've done some practicing, and my 5 practice runs didn't have any errors, and you can see the logs of those runs as well. So I've been placing an order for an apple recently, and the cost of that apple was £1. So I'm just going to click H first, so you can see the help. So when you're using DevTools, if you're ever not sure what you can do, you can click H and it'll bring up this help menu. And here I can see if I click I, that'll invoke a Lambda, or if you're hovering over an EventBridge, it'll let you inject an event into that bus. So I can just click escape to get rid of that. And now I can click I on my place order Lambda. And you get a quite easy interface. I can see that it is going to trigger the place order Lambda, and I'm able to pass in a payload to the body. So here I'm going to pass in an item. I did apple last time, so maybe this time I'll do an orange. And for apples, maybe we'll say oranges are a bit cheaper. They're 50p. can submit that, and it'll take a second, but we can see the dashboard log, it's already executed correctly, and then in a moment we should see the Lambda logs update, and it'll say that there's been orange with the price 50p. So very simple. If you ever want to trigger a Lambda, you can do it straight from the terminal without ever having to open the console. If there's something you want to do with this Lambda that you can't do in DevTools, I can just click O, and it's opened it in a different screen. But here you can see it opened up the console with that Lambda. So it's very easy to then eject into the console if you ever need to do something that we don't natively support. Now, if we remember the demo.
Just a question, does that happen automatically? Does the console open automatically when you do that?
Yeah, so if I click H, you'll see O button when you're on a Lambda or event bus will open it up. Now, I'm already logged into the account. I've never tried to do it when I'm not logged in. Maybe, Ben, you might know the answer. Would it take me to a sign-in screen instead?
We did think very briefly that because you're using an AWS profile to run the tool, we could actually log you into the console access and generate sort of a signed link. I think that wouldn't be the best sort of security element to the tool, so we didn't. Yeah. So either you need to log in, or if you're already logged in, it will open it for you.
Right. And then we also do have a question from Malkeet. Can we pass a payload from a JSON file?
So at the moment, you can't pass a payload from a JSON file. You can paste in a payload, and also, if Alex goes to trigger the function again, there should be sort of the same events waiting to be re-triggered. Because often we find when we're developing, we keep triggering the same event to try and fix the bug or build the feature. But it's a really interesting idea if we could have sort of a feature.json, an event.json file that we could route to. That could be really nice. So yeah, we'll definitely take that under consideration.
Yeah, and this is an open source tool. So if you have any ideas that you want to add opening an issue on the repo, means we're more likely to remember and do it. And also you can always open up a pull request if you're particularly passionate about getting a feature in.
Yeah, can you guys send us the link for the repo so we can just make sure everyone has it?
Yep, I'll send the link.
Awesome,
nice.
Thank you.
Cool. So in this case, I'm not going to trigger the Lambda again, so I can just click escape to get out of that. And I'll go up to the create invoice Lambda, which if we remember back earlier, this is the one triggered by the event bridge. If I click enter on this one now, you'll see so we've changed our function metrics. So it's now looking at the metrics for this create invoice Lambda. And you can see, again, in my sort of practice for this demo, there were some errors. So I had to do some quick code fixes beforehand. But you'll see what this Lambda does is it prints out the body that was sent in EventBridge in the logs, just so we can quickly see that it's worked. And so we can see orange 50p here. And that's kind of it. That's all that this one does other than S3. And there's nothing in DevTools to go look at S3. We'll come back to that later with the test tools demo. If I go down, sorry. Key was a bit sticky for some reason, it wasn't working, so I'll just relaunch it. If I go down to place order though, just to show that, again, I actually will trigger one more event. So in this case, let's say banana, since I've done orange and apple, and bananas are probably my favorite fruit, so that could be the most expensive. These could be £2. Price. £2. There we go. So I can submit that. And once again, we'll just give it a second so we can see in the Lambda logs down here it coming through and make sure there wasn't any errors. There we go, banana for £2. I can go up to create invoice and select that one, and we can see that it successfully triggered that Lambda. We can see the banana £2 has been printed out there as well.
And these are CloudWatch logs that are down here?
Yeah, exactly. These are the logs from the CloudWatch script that's been created for the Lambdas. Now, if I use this tab, the tab key, I can then go between sections. So I've now gone down to the EventBridge section. You can tell because it's now got that sort of orange border or yellow border instead of blue. I can go down. EventBridge is the uncreative name I've given my custom EventBridge instead of the default one. And on this, we can do a few things. So I can click O, similar to before, and it'll open up. Just keeps doing it on the wrong desktop. There we go. It'll open up Event Bridge on the bridge that we're looking at for us. And here, if we want to start discovery, which I've already turned on for this bridge, so that schema registry Ben was talking about earlier starts updating, we could turn that on here, and we might want to go turn on an archive in case we want to do a replay in the future. Those are sort of things that aren't currently supported in DevTools natively, and where the O functionality comes in handy. But if I click H again, just to show us the commands, there's also, once you do have that registry turned on, if you click R, it'll open up the registry window for us. So here, if I click R on Event Bridge, and this is probably a small bug, it doesn't look like anything's selected. When there's a bigger list of more registries, it's quite clear this first one is selected. So if I click Enter, we'll see the event schema for our place ordered or order placed event. And if I click on that, it'll actually open up with the schema pre-filled. So I've been sending it with an item and price. And now if I don't want to bother triggering this with that Lambda I had before, I want to inject an event directly onto the event bridge or onto the bus, I can do it here. So I'm running out of fruits off the top of my head, maybe a pear. And a pear, let's say, is similar to an apple. So for £4. And then I can submit that, and that'll go directly onto the bridge without having to trigger a Lambda. It'll give you just a sort of sense check before you submit it. So it's going onto the custom bridge, event.bridge. The event it's going to send is the order placed event, and it's going to put in the details, pair for £1. So I'm happy with that. I can go down to submit and just inject that event onto the bus. And then just to check if that's worked, let's go back up to the Lambda section and look at the logs for the create invoice just to see that that's printed out pair. There we go, pair for £1. So it's quite useful. It means you don't have to go to the console all the time if you're in development mode and you just want to push some different events to test out, maybe a Lambda triggering, or to just sort of play around with Event Bridge and see that your code's working. Before I go, sort of one more thing I'll show you, before I finish off this demo. In location, it's automatically picked up from my serverless YAML that we're using EUS2. I can sort of change the region. So it's shown by the red X there, but if I use the arrow keys, I can change to select a different region, maybe AP Southeast 1. I can click Enter. And it obviously isn't going to find that Lambda there anymore, so it's getting some errors because I've not deployed to that region. But if you were working with multi-region architectures, this is quite a useful feature. But that's, unless I've missed anything, Ben, I think that's DevTools demoed.
No, I think that's everything. You did mention that it's picking up the region from your serverless YAML. You can, of course, pass it in. And the other thing to mention, especially on this channel, as Eric will definitely be watching the replay, is it's completely compatible with SAM as well. It's actually compatible with anything based off CloudFormation, but we've tested it out and used it a few times on SAM projects. It works on serverless framework projects, and it'll work on anything that actually builds a CloudFormation stack under the hood on AWS.
Oh,
yeah, so down the bottom here, you can do --SAM when you launch it, and that'll execute with the SAM framework instead.
Eric will be so happy to hear that. Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions for Alex and Ben?
And we do have another demo to jump to after this one as well.
Yeah, you guys are gonna demo the test tools. Doesn't look like there's any questions yet. So do you guys want to go ahead and do the test tools demo?
And if you have any questions on this as we're going through the test tools, feel free to ask. I'll just share my screen again. Cool. Are you seeing that on your side?
Yes.
Perfect. So that was SLS DevTools. Obviously, when we're developing, we're also often testing. And with serverless, it actually changes how we test. With 100% serverless architecture, so a fully serverless architecture using Lambda, DynamoDB, Cognito, EventBridge, step functions, you can start to build very elegant architectures, but also architectures that are ephemeral, meaning short-lived. We can bring up these architectures very rapidly and also close them down very rapidly. And as everything's pay per use, it's also not very expensive to do that. So our development process at Theodo actually, and what we've shared out, is what we call serverless flows. So we spin up an environment when we open a pull request, and there's zero mocking in our test. We run against that real architecture that's exactly the same as production. And we actually use this approach for load testing as well. But when it comes to testing, that means our testing pyramid has changed a bit. It used to be that we'd open the pull, in this process, we open the pull requests, spin up the stack, run the unit tests, run the integration tests, potentially run some end-to-end tests, and then tear down that sort of CI stack that was spinning up before we merged to production. But that changes somewhat the sort of traditional testing pyramid. With a serverless architecture, we really try and avoid as much mocking as possible and try and test against the real services, and we can spin up a whole architecture to run these tests. So that shape of units through to integration through to end-to-end, our focus has changed a bit, and some people call this like the honeycomb style. There's a couple of different shapes going out there, but really our focus is really on those integration tests. Of course, we write unit tests, and where it's relevant, we write end-to-end tests, but those integration tests are really key when you get those more complicated combinations of different services and an event-driven architecture. So if we had a feature, and it's the feature that Alex actually has in his demo project, where we have a Lambda function, which is pushing an event onto EventBridge. Of course, we could trigger EventBridge directly, but let's imagine that first Lambda function is some sort of order service that creates the order. And then when the order has been created, it sends a message off to Amazon EventBridge, and EventBridge is then triggering our payment service, and our payment service will generate a PDF at the end of the process and put that into S3. If we want to test that with absolutely no mocking, we actually found there's actually quite a lot of setup to do, especially to test EventBridge because it's quite asynchronous and there's a bit of complexity to writing assertions. Then we actually found there's a lot of helpers we can write around assertions on Lambda, assertions on S3, and assertions on lots of different services. So Alex is going to demo how we're going to test both parts of this, how we're going to test that initial Lambda function triggering out to EventBridge, and also that Lambda function then writing some result to S3. And we're looking at Lambda and EventBridge. Internally at Theodo, we're using this across a number of tools. Gradually, as we use things on projects, we then open source them. So we're starting to open source some of the other services we support. Right now, we have EventBridge supported. We have S3 supported. We're about to release Dynamo support. And I think Step Functions is the next one we're going to open source. I know Alex is also quite passionate about getting our AppSync helpers out soon as well. So we're really hoping to see this service grow. And again, it's 100% open source, and that's SLS test tools, which is really sort of a set of assertions to help you test serverless architectures. And if you're interested in looking at the project, as Alex starts to talk through the demo, you can find that they're all in our Theodo UK GitHub organization. We'll share the link out in just a moment. But Alex, do you want to take over and run us through a demo?
Yeah, sounds good. Nice, awesome. Is the text big enough there, or should I make it a bit bigger?
It looks good to me.
Looks good to me.
Nice, okay, I'll get going. So first off, I'll just remind people the demo code that we're using that we're going to test. It's the same that we used for the SLS and DevTools demo. So our first Lambda that we want to write a test for is the place order Lambda. And all this does is takes in a body with some details and then publishes an event onto that event bridge saying that an order has been placed. And so if I look at the test we've written for that, we want to quite easily just know that the Lambda has successfully emitted an event onto the event bridge. And so we'll look a little bit after this at how SLS test tools helps you with that. But just to look at the sort of end result, the test ends up being quite short. So we're testing to make sure that the correct event is emitted and that the event bus is triggered. And so in the end, we have this event bridge object that SLS test tools makes for us that allows us to get the events. I'll talk a bit how that works behind the scenes when we look at the actual test tools code. But then with that, we can check that any event has been published to the event bridge. And then to be a bit more specific, we can test that an event with the correct source has been published, just to make sure it is that same one that we're looking at. And there's a few other assertions that have been added over time to check against the whole object with a part, like the whole event with a partial object. You can find those on the actual repo. So some details I've probably skipped over slightly. The way SLS test tools works is it's an extension of Jest, similar to Jest extended. This is because we mostly work with sort of TypeScript when we're developing serverless applications at Theodo. And so it does make it quite easy for us to write tests on the front end and the back end with similar technologies. Now let me quickly remind you what the other Lambda does, so the create invoice Lambda. If we look at the serverless YAML quickly, we'll see that this Lambda is actually triggered by the place order source on an event. So when that first Lambda publishes an event with this source, it'll trigger the create invoice Lambda. And all that will do is I've got this sort of dummy PDF called invoice.pdf, and whenever it receives that Lambda, it puts that PDF into S3. So again, we want to run a test very simply that allows us to check that the correct PDF has been stored in S3. And so here we've got a simple helper with that same event bridge object from earlier called publish event that just allows us to not have to duplicate things like the name of the event bus that we would have set up earlier. So here we're going to publish an event with the source .place order and just put in some dummy details and pass in a file name. And then we're going to wait 5 seconds. There's some helpers coming in the future to remove the need for waits, where it can just keep checking if the event has been published and then continue naturally. That's a work in progress. But for now, we can wait our 5 seconds. And then once that 5 seconds is up, we're going to check that the S3 that we're storing the PDF in actually exists. And then as long as that passes, we're going to go down and check that the file that was passed in has the content type application/PDF. And then finally, we're going to actually load up that dummy PDF that I have and check that the content of that file is exactly the same. So before I go in and explain how those assertions and helpers work behind the scenes, let's run the tests and make sure they actually pass.
I mean, it's a live demo, Alex, so they're definitely not going to.
Yeah, I'm trying to remain optimistic for now.
Yeah.
So here, it's quite simple to run. We've got SLS test tools installed as a dev dependency, and we've got a test script just to run our integration tests. And I'm running them in band just because currently we don't support parallel executions, but again, there's some work that's happening to try and make that work in the future. And so fingers crossed.
And these are running in jest, Alex, if you mentioned that.
Yeah, I think I briefly mentioned it at the start.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. So both our tests have passed. And I guess we can go into how the actual code works.
Before we do, Alex, can I, just to mess up your demo, can you make the test fail?
Yes, definitely. What's an easy one? Let's say instead of PDF, it's looking for text. And why don't we make them both fail? So the first one is expecting an event with place order. Maybe there's an order failed event instead. Nice. Remember to save the file. And all right, fingers crossed it fails this time.
It's looking good.
Awesome.
But I think the first one
not
failed.
the best. One has passed.
I've now messed up your demo.
No, that's completely fine. It's probably because of this purge queue operation. I didn't use -- keep. There's a small limitation with the purges on SQS queues we use behind the scenes. I'll get into some of that detail slightly later. So the first one failed. It's saying that event bridge demo place order does not match order failed. So awesome. The next one that passed is the S3 one, which we would have expected to fail.
And that's because they're running after each other. The first one didn't get the right event, so didn't delete the event, and that event was still waiting, I think, potentially. Maybe actually it's the purging that we talked about. So maybe you can talk about how it's working under the hood, and then we can explain.
And then, we can come back to this afterwards, Yeah. Cool. So basically, SLS test tools is broken into two areas. We have our helpers and our assertions. Helpers, for example, are this event bridge object you've seen us use earlier. And what this does is it will spin up an event bridge client using the credentials that have been passed in. It will create a rule on that event bridge that actually points to an SQS queue that we'll create for you behind the scenes. And since you can't sort of natively do like a get events on event bridge to find out which events have been published to that bus in the past, what this does is it stores those events on an SQS queue, and then we can sort of poll the SQS queue to find out which events have been triggered. And so there's a few options here. You can do a keep so that it doesn't tear down the SQS queue after you run, if you're going to be running the test quite a lot one after the other. If you don't provide this, by default, it will tear down the queue and the rule, just so you don't have infrastructure that you don't expect just lying around in your AWS account. Nice. So it creates the queue.
I just want to ask you about that, Alex. So when you, after the test runs, does that part automatically get cleaned up? Like it removes all of that, like the test data that you created?
Yeah, exactly. If I go a bit further down, maybe I'll close my terminal for now, just so it gets a bit more screen real estate. There's two methods that help with this. So if you're doing --keep, it'll just purge the queue. And so this is just going to remove all events from the queue at the end of your test running. That's whether they succeed or fail, it'll purge the queue. But keep the actual SQS queue still available so that when you rerun the test in the future, you can just reuse that same queue without having to spin up another one. Alternatively, so that's this logic here. Alternatively, if you don't do the --keep, what it will do is it will remove the target from the event bridge, so that delete the queue, remove the target from event bridge, and then delete the rule on event bridge. So that means you won't have the queue anymore. The events that go to that bridge or to that bus won't be looking for this SQS queue to try and send it the events to. Now we've got some feedback from the community. What if you cancel your test midway through? And we're thinking of some ideas about maybe doing some cleanup at the start of the test as well. But at the moment, when you ran your test again, it would tear down that anyway for you, even if you did sort of cancel your test halfway through.
Okay.
But so I've mostly sort of shown you the infrastructure code. As far as actually using it, there is a help up a publish event that just stops you from having to keep entering the event bridge event again and passing in sort of the array of events, when in most cases we're normally just publishing one. And then there's the get events, and this is what queues SQS to get the latest events, and then you can use that to run your assertions. There's also some general ones if you want to reuse those credentials and not have like find out what stack resources there are. These are a little less interesting, but they can save you a bit of time. But the really fun part is when we get into the assertions. So there's not too many now. We've just got some for S3 and some for Event Bridge, but like Ben said, we do a lot of these things internally, and we're slowly moving them over to the open source when we find the time. And it is open source, so if there's any assertions people want to add, feel free to open pull requests. We can start with the Event Bridge ones. So the to have events just checks that some events were returned. As long as events isn't null or undefined, then it succeeds when you pass the events. Otherwise, it will fail. And the other one is to have events with source. And so this will get the latest events and check that the expected source name matches the received source name. We have a PR that we're hoping to merge in soon that changes this to check all the events instead of just the first one. And also in that same PR1 that allows you to do partial object matching against the event. So if you didn't want to use source, if you wanted to use detail, for example, you would then be able to do that once that is merged in. And then the assertions for S3, we have the to exist. And now this is quite cool because we're using async assertions here. So what this will do is actually load up an S3 client with that bucket and then just check that resolves correctly, and so that we know it exists. And if it returns a 404, then it will fail. with the content type equal to. It's a bit more interesting, but again, it'll get the body and check that the content matches the body, and with the content type equal to, sorry, now it'll check the content type equals the content type. So they're quite powerful. They save you a lot of code. It's quite nice when you're looking at the S3 tests. It's kind of a one-liner. If I zoom out a little bit to check that the S3 has the file that you're expecting. And yeah, there should be more coming through as we go. Now let's quickly try and fix this first failed one and see if the second one fails now that it's been a bit of time.
And just when you're doing that, Alex, I'd mentioned EventBridge is like the very complicated assertion where we had to think about using SQS and it got complicated. And the code is accessible, but it looks quite intimidating. The S3 assertion, it's really easy. It's like 10 lines. So making assertions around DynamoDB, they're also very easy. So if anyone does want to open a pull request or wants some help opening a pull request, feel free to reach out. We'd be really happy to support anyone wanting to help out.
And are these tests that you're going to be running in like your build pipeline that are going to be like blocking like new code from coming in if they fail, or where are these tests running?
Yeah, so exactly. We run them on our CI after our unit tests and before our end-to-end tests. We're running them on most of our projects using SLS test tools now, so presenting as putting bugs into production.
Perfect.
So I rerun it and we can go up. It says that both passed, but the test suite failed. I think it's because I didn't have the awaits before the expect. But if I scroll up, we can see the assertion actually did fail. So it's saying expected application/text, but instead got application/PDF. So the actual assertion did fail. I think it's just because I didn't have those awaits in. And here we go. Now that I've added in the awaits, because they are async assertions, it's now recognizing that test actually failed.
To be clear, they're the awaits in your demo of a test rather than in the test tools itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just something to keep in mind when you are using it. The EventBridge assertions aren't asynchronous, so they don't need a wait here, but the S3 ones do rely on async just so that we can query that S3 in there for you instead of having to pass in an object that contains the sort of already connected to S3 bucket. But there we go. I think that's everything for the test tools, unless there's anything you think I've missed, Ben.
Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, does anyone have any questions for Ben and Alex? Go ahead and pop them in the chat. Doesn't look like there's any questions right now. Is there anything else that you guys want to show us?
Did you have a few more slides, Ben, or are you done with those?
That's a very good point.
I know in the first version of your slides, there were some post-demo slides, but they may have been removed.
No, I think there might be a slide or two. You seeing this on your side? There we go. So yeah, if you do want to look at any of these, Theodo UK is the GitHub organization. You find SLS dev tools and SLS test tools. So if you have any feedback, any pull requests, someone from the community merged in opened a pull request a couple of days ago. We got on it the same day, reviewed and released it out. So we're really responsive on that, and we're going to open some good first issues. So it's accessible if you want to try and contribute for the first time. And you can find these slides at slides.com/Ben Ellerby, so you can find the links to all of that stuff. If you want to find our open source projects, they're on our website, so theodo.co.uk/expert/serverless. Alex tweets a lot about what he's releasing on SLS DevTools, which you can find his Twitter there. Same on my side, and there is actually, if you search an SLS DevTools Twitter account, which covers both the projects, so anytime there's a release, anytime there's a new version, anytime an issue or a pull request is opened, we're tweeting out sort of the updates as and when they happen.
Awesome, thank you both so much. I think both of these tools are super useful. I like in the dev tools where you just press a button and it does whatever you want for you, like that table of Alex, can you show us that table again of the commands and the corresponding descriptions? I just want to
of course. Let me just quickly share my screen again. So preemptively stop sharing. There we go. And that should be, if you can put on the screen, it should be there. Nice. So yeah, there's a few things you can do. The main ones are the O to open up the Lambda or the event bus in the console. There is I to invoke or inject an event on the event bus. And L will actually show you the Lambda statistics window, which I don't think I showed that when we were doing the demo.
Yeah, it's, the Lambda statistic windows gets more into the 80s ASCII art style of user interface.
Yeah, I might need to zoom out slightly just to, the ASCII art doesn't work the best at higher font sizes. Let's try I. It wasn't I, was it?
It's L.
It was L, wasn't it? I'm mixing up my similar characters. L, there you go. So you start to see some more statistics. Enter, because it didn't
so that has
look like it was quite all of them. There we go.
There we go. So that has the deployment history, so you can see the different deployments that have happened, the invocations in the past 12 hours. If there's any errors, you start to see sort of a pie chart of the error breakdowns, the same durations graph you've seen before. And if you're using a Lambda layer, which is a way to share a large piece of data or potentially a custom runtime, you'll see the layers that are applied and the versions of those layers in the bottom left.
Yeah. Now if I go up to the create invoice one, I think this does have some failed Lambdas. So you'll see the 38%. You get a nice bit of chunk of red when you do have some errors in your invocations.
Right. It's a great way to visualize everything from the console too. So yeah, this is awesome. Thank you both so much for being here and for showing us your tools. I'm just going to post the repo link for test tools, and it's the same thing for dev tools, just change test to dev.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome.
And there are some more SLS tools coming out soon. Which is the,
oh, great. We are looking forward to those as well. So thank you both so much. And I think we're going to wrap up Serverless Office Hours for today. Thank you guys, and we will see everybody next week.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was good fun.